Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her rifle scope for the 100th time that morning. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly before her, shimmering in waves of heat that made everything look like a mirage. She had been at the military training facility for 3 months now, and every day felt like a test she wasn't sure she could pass. The other soldiers in her unit watched her with mixed expressions. Some showed respect for her dedication, others displayed barely hidden skepticism. Sarah knew what they were thinking. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she didn't look like the typical military sniper. Her soft features and gentle voice often fooled people into thinking she was fragile. They couldn't have been more wrong. Colonel James Rodriguez approached the firing line with his usual stern expression. His weathered face told stories of countless battles, and his reputation as one of the military's toughest trainers preceded him everywhere he went. Sarah had heard whispers that he had never passed a female sniper candidate in his 15 years of service. Today she was determined to change that statistic. "Martinez," the colonel's voice cut through the desert air like a blade. "You're up for the long-range assessment." Sarah's heart pounded as she picked up her rifle. The M24 sniper weapon system felt familiar in her hands now, like an extension of her own body. She had spent countless hours learning every detail of the weapon, from its bolt-action mechanism to the precise way the trigger responded to pressure. The colonel gestured toward a series of targets set up at various distances across the desert floor. "Standard protocol today, Martinez. We start at 800 yards and work our way up. Think you can handle it?" There was something in his tone that made Sarah pause. It wasn't quite mockery, but it wasn't encouragement either. She had noticed that the colonel seemed to push her harder than the male recruits, setting higher standards and expecting perfection where others might receive praise for merely adequate performance. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She settled into position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. The first target appeared in her scope, a standard military silhouette at 800 yards. Sarah controlled her breathing, just as she had been taught. In-hold squeezed the trigger on the natural respiratory pause, follow through. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and through the scope she watched the target fall. "Good shot," the colonel acknowledged, though his tone remained neutral. "Next target, 1,000 yards. As Sarah prepared for the longer shot, she couldn't help but think about how she had ended up here. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she had learned to shoot from her grandfather, a World War II veteran who had taught her that shooting was more about patience and precision than strength. Her grandfather had told her stories about legendary marksmen who could hit targets that seemed impossible to reach. The 1,000-yard shot connected perfectly, followed by successful hits at 1,200 and 1,500 yards. Each shot built Sarah's confidence, but she noticed that the colonel's expression remained unchanged. If anything, he seemed to be growing more skeptical as her performance improved. "Impressive shooting, Martinez," he said finally, "but anyone can hit a stationary target on a calm day. Real combat situations are different. You need to be able to adapt to changing conditions, multiple targets, and extreme pressure." Sarah nodded, understanding that this was more than just weapons training. The colonel was testing her mental toughness as much as her marksmanship skills. In the field, a sniper needed to be able to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The other recruits had finished their assessments and were cleaning their weapons in the shade of a nearby building. Sarah could see them glancing in her direction, waiting to see how she would perform under the colonel's increasingly demanding standards. "Sir, I'm ready for whatever challenge you think is appropriate," Sarah said, meeting the colonel's gaze directly. For the first time that day, something that might have been approval flickered across the colonel's face. "We'll see about that, Martinez. Report to the advanced range tomorrow at 0500 hours. And Martinez," he paused, his expression becoming serious, "bring your A-game. What we're doing tomorrow will separate the real snipers from the wannabes." As Sarah cleaned her rifle that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring something unlike anything she had experienced in her training so far. The colonel's words echoed in her mind, and she found herself both excited and nervous about what lay ahead. She had come too far to back down now, and whatever challenge awaited her, she was determined to meet it head-on. The desert night was surprisingly cold, and as Sarah lay in her bunk, she stared at the ceiling and ran through every shooting technique she had learned. Tomorrow would test everything she had worked for, and she intended to be ready. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., but Sarah was already awake. She had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities about what the colonel had planned for her. She dressed quickly in her desert camouflage uniform and grabbed her gear, making sure her rifle was clean and properly maintained. The advanced range was located in a different part of the facility, accessible only by a rough dirt road that wound through rocky terrain. Sarah had never been to this section before, and as she approached in the pre-dawn darkness, she could see why it was reserved for special training exercises. The landscape here was more challenging, with natural obstacles, varying elevations, and unpredictable wind patterns created by the rocky formations. This wasn't the controlled environment of the standard firing range where she had been training for months. Colonel Rodriguez was already waiting when she arrived, along with two other instructors Sarah didn't recognize. Both men looked like seasoned combat veterans, their faces bearing the same weathered expression as the colonel. One carried what appeared to be sophisticated wind measurement equipment, while the other had a laptop computer and various electronic devices. "Martinez, meet Sergeant Thompson and Corporal Hayes," the colonel said without any preliminary greeting. "They're here to help with today's assessment. This isn't going to be like anything you've done before." Sergeant Thompson, a tall man with graying hair, stepped forward. "We're going to test your abilities under realistic field conditions. Variable wind speeds, elevation changes, moving targets, and extreme distances. The kind of shots that separate the legends from the ordinary soldiers." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She had trained for challenging conditions, but something in the instructor's demeanor suggested this would push her far beyond her previous experience. Corporal Hayes opened his laptop and showed Sarah a topographical map of the area. "Your first target is positioned at 2,000 yards on the ridge across that valley. The elevation difference is approximately 200 feet, and current wind conditions are gusting between 8 and 12 miles per hour from the southwest." Sarah studied the map carefully, noting the terrain features and trying to calculate the adjustments she would need to make. A 2,000-yard shot was already at the edge of what most snipers attempted, and the added complications of wind and elevation made it exponentially more difficult. "But that's not all," the colonel added, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. "You'll need to account for atmospheric pressure, humidity, and temperature variations. In combat, you don't get ideal conditions. You work with what you have." Sarah nodded, accepting the challenge. She had always known that real-world sniping was vastly different from range training, but she had prepared herself mentally for exactly this kind of test. She set up her rifle on a rocky outcropping that provided a stable shooting platform. Through her scope, she could barely make out the target on the distant ridge. It appeared as little more than a speck against the desert landscape. Sarah began her calculations, factoring in all the variables the instructors had mentioned. The wind was particularly tricky, as it seemed to change direction and intensity every few seconds. Sarah had learned to read wind patterns by watching vegetation, dust, and other environmental indicators, but the swirling air currents in this rocky terrain created complex patterns that were difficult to predict. "Take your time, Martinez," Sergeant Thompson said, "but remember, in a real situation you might not have the luxury of extended preparation time." Sarah steadied her breathing and focused on the target. She made minute adjustments to her scope, compensating for the distance, elevation, and wind. The mathematics of long-range shooting ran through her mind like a complex equation, with dozens of variables that all had to align perfectly for a successful shot. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the rifle's report echoed across the valley. Through her scope, Sarah watched as her bullet traced an arc through the air, fighting against gravity and wind resistance. For a moment that seemed to last forever. She couldn't tell if the shot had been successful. Then Corporal Hayes' radio crackled to life. "Target hit. Clean shot, center mass." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction, but the colonel's expression remained neutral. "Good shooting, Martinez. But we're just getting started. The next target is at 2,500 yards and the conditions are about to get more challenging." As if on cue, the wind began to pick up, and Sarah could see dust devils forming in the distance. The morning sun was also rising higher, creating heat mirages that would make target identification even more difficult. "Sir," Sarah said, her confidence building despite the increasing difficulty, "I'm ready for the next challenge." The colonel studied her for a long moment as if weighing something in his mind. "Martinez, what I'm about to ask you to attempt is beyond standard training protocols. It's the kind of shot that most snipers would consider impossible. Are you sure you want to continue? Sarah met his gaze without wavering. Sir, I didn't come this far to back down from a challenge. Whatever you think I can handle, I'm ready to try. The three instructors exchanged glances, and Sarah sensed there was more to this assessment than she had initially understood. This wasn't just about testing her marksmanship skills. There was something else at stake, something that made this evaluation different from routine training exercises. The colonel walked to his vehicle and returned with a sealed envelope marked with official military stamps. Sarah watched as he broke the seal and pulled out what appeared to be classified documents. This was definitely not standard training protocol. Martinez, what I'm about to share with you is classified information, the colonel began, his voice taking on a serious tone that Sarah had never heard before. 3 days ago, intelligence sources confirmed that a high-value target will be moving through this region. Someone we've been tracking for months. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't a training exercise anymore. This was real. Sergeant Thompson pulled out a photograph and handed it to Sarah. The image showed a man in his 40s with distinctive facial features and cold, calculating eyes. Viktor Kozlov, former Russian Special Forces, now working as a weapons dealer for terrorist organizations. He's responsible for supplying advanced weaponry that has been used in attacks against our allies. The colonel continued. Intelligence indicates that Kozlov will be traveling through this area tomorrow morning, using a route that takes him approximately 3 miles from this position. Traditional interdiction methods have failed because he travels with heavy security and sophisticated counter-surveillance equipment. Sarah studied the photograph, understanding the implications. You're talking about a 3-mile shot, sir. That's beyond the effective range of almost any sniper rifle. Almost any rifle, Corporal Hayes corrected, gesturing toward a large case that Sarah hadn't noticed before. But not this one. Hayes opened the case to reveal a weapon that Sarah had only heard about in whispered conversations among advanced marksmen. The Barrett M82A1, a 50-caliber anti-material rifle capable of extraordinary long-range precision. The weapon was massive, weighing nearly 30 pounds and measuring over 4 feet in length. The Barrett can theoretically make kills at distances exceeding 3,000 yards in the right hands, the colonel explained. But the shot we're asking you to consider would be at the absolute limit of what's possible. Variable wind conditions, extreme distance, and a moving target. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the information. A 3-mile shot would require split-second timing, perfect environmental calculations, and an almost supernatural level of precision. Even the most experienced snipers in the world would consider such a shot nearly impossible. Sir, why me? Sarah asked. Surely there are more experienced marksmen available for this kind of operation. The colonel's expression softened slightly. Martinez, in the past 3 months, you've demonstrated something that can't be taught. An intuitive understanding of ballistics that goes beyond technical knowledge. Your shooting scores aren't just impressive. They're unprecedented for someone with your level of experience. Sergeant Thompson nodded in agreement. We've been watching your progress carefully. You have a natural ability to read environmental conditions and make instinctive adjustments that veteran snipers struggle with. It's not just about following procedures. You seem to understand the physics of long-range shooting at a level that most people never achieve. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and overwhelming responsibility. The weight of what they were asking her to do began to sink in. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about stopping someone who posed a real threat to innocent people. What's the timeline? She asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Kozlov is scheduled to pass through the area at approximately 800 hours tomorrow morning, the colonel replied. You'll have 1 shot, maybe 2 at most, before his security team reacts and he disappears again. Miss this opportunity, and we might not get another chance for months. Sarah looked out across the desert landscape, trying to visualize the shot that would be required. The target would be moving along a road that wound through the valley below, visible for only a few minutes as it crossed an open area between 2 rocky outcroppings. I need to see the Barrett in action, Sarah said. If I'm going to make this shot, I need to understand how this weapon behaves at extreme range. The colonel smiled for the first time that day. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. We have the rest of today to familiarize you with the weapon and run practice shots at extended range. But Martinez. His expression became serious again. I need you to understand that this is completely voluntary. No one will think less of you if you decide this is beyond what you're willing to attempt. Sarah thought about her grandfathers, stories of legendary marksmen who had made impossible shots under desperate circumstances. She thought about the victims of the terrorist attacks that Kozlov's weapons had enabled. Most of all, she thought about the months of training that had brought her to this moment. Sir, I appreciate you giving me the choice, Sarah said, her decision already made. But if you believe I can make this shot, then I'm willing to try. Someone needs to stop this man, and if I have the skills to do it, then it's my responsibility to act. The three instructors exchanged glances again, and Sarah could see a mixture of admiration and concern in their expressions. They knew they were asking her to attempt something at the very edge of human capability, but they also recognized that sometimes extraordinary circumstances required extraordinary measures. All right, Martinez, the colonel said. Let's see what you can do with the Barrett. But remember, tomorrow, when it counts, you'll only get one chance to get it right. Sarah's first attempt to lift the Barrett M82A1 reminded her just how different this weapon was from anything she had used before. The massive rifle required a completely different approach to shooting, and Sarah spent the first hour simply learning how to handle its weight and size effectively. Corporal Hayes served as her instructor, walking her through the weapon's unique characteristics. The Barrett fires a 50 caliber BMG round with a muzzle velocity of approximately 2,800 feet per second, he explained. At 3 miles, that bullet will take nearly 8 seconds to reach the target. You'll need to lead a moving vehicle by almost 200 feet to account for travel time. The mathematics were staggering. Sarah had never attempted a shot where she had to calculate so far ahead of a moving target. The margin for error was essentially zero. A miscalculation of even a few degrees would result in a miss by hundreds of yards. Sergeant Thompson set up a series of practice targets at progressively longer distances. We'll start at 1,500 yards and work our way up, he said. The Barrett behaves differently than your M24, and you need to understand its ballistic characteristics before tomorrow morning. Sarah's first shot with the Barrett was a revelation. The weapon's massive recoil and thunderous report were unlike anything she had experienced, but the precision was extraordinary. At 1,500 yards, her bullet struck within inches of the target center. Good adaptation, the colonel observed. But remember, tomorrow's target won't be stationary. We need to practice tracking moving objects at extreme range. They spent the next several hours setting up increasingly complex scenarios. Corporal Hayes used a remote-controlled vehicle to simulate a moving target, while Sergeant Thompson called out wind conditions and other variables that Sarah would need to factor into her calculations. By late afternoon, Sarah was consistently hitting moving targets at distances up to 2,500 yards. Her confidence with the Barrett was growing, but she knew that tomorrow's shot would be unlike anything she had practiced. The combination of distance, environmental factors, and the pressure of a real operation created variables that couldn't be fully replicated in training. As the sun began to set, the colonel called a halt to the practice session. Martinez, you've made remarkable progress with the weapon, but there's something else we need to discuss. He led Sarah to an observation post that overlooked the valley where tomorrow's operation would take place. Through a powerful spotting scope, Sarah could see the road where Kozlov would be traveling. The distance seemed impossible. The road appeared as little more than a thin line across the desert floor. Intelligence indicates that Kozlov will be traveling in an armored vehicle, the colonel continued. Standard ammunition won't penetrate his protection, which is why we're using armor-piercing incendiary rounds. These bullets can punch through several inches of steel, but they also have different ballistic properties than standard ammunition. Sarah looked through the spotting scope again, trying to visualize the shot. At 3 miles, even with the powerful optics, the target area looked impossibly small. A moving vehicle at that distance would be barely visible, requiring her to rely as much on instinct and timing as on precise calculation. Sir, what's the backup plan if I miss? Sarah asked. The colonel's expression grew grim. There isn't one. Kozlov's route takes him through this valley only once, and his security team will react immediately to any gunshot. Miss, and he disappears back into the international underground where we can't touch him. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She had always been competitive and driven to succeed, but tomorrow's mission carried consequences far beyond personal achievement. People's lives depended on her ability to make an impossible shot under extreme pressure. "I need to study the environmental conditions," Sarah said. "Wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, temperature variations throughout the morning. If I'm going to make this shot, I need to understand every factor that could affect the bullet's trajectory." Sergeant Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's the right approach. We have detailed meteorological data for the past month, including typical morning conditions in this area. The weather forecast for tomorrow is favorable: clear skies, light to moderate winds." They spent the evening going over detailed topographical maps, weather patterns, and ballistic calculations. Sarah filled several notebooks with data, creating reference charts that would help her make quick adjustments if conditions changed during the operation. As night fell, the colonel assigned Sarah to a small quarters where she could rest before the mission. "Get some sleep, Martinez. Tomorrow you'll need to be sharper than you've ever been in your life." But sleep proved elusive. Sarah lay in the narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and running through scenarios in her mind. She visualized the shot from every angle, rehearsing the sequence of actions she would need to perform perfectly under pressure. She thought about the photograph of Viktor Kozlov and the intelligence reports detailing the weapons he had supplied to terrorist organizations. Tomorrow's mission wasn't just about demonstrating her skills as a marksman. It was about preventing future attacks and saving innocent lives. Around midnight, Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of desert landscapes, mathematical calculations, and the thunderous report of the Barrett M82A1. In a few hours, she would face the ultimate test of everything she had learned about precision shooting. The alarm was set for 500 hours, giving her just enough time to prepare equipment, review conditions, and get into position before Kozlov's convoy arrived. One shot, one chance, one opportunity to prove that sometimes the impossible was simply another word for difficult. Sarah woke before her alarm. Her internal clock adjusted to the mission timeline. The desert air was crisp and cold at 500 hours, with visibility extending for miles across the barren landscape. Perfect conditions for long-range shooting. The colonel was already at the firing position when Sarah arrived, along with Sergeant Thompson and Corporal Hayes. They had set up a sophisticated observation post with multiple spotting scopes, wind measurement equipment, and communication gear to coordinate with intelligence. "Sources tracking Kozlov's movement. Status report," the colonel said as Sarah began preparing her equipment. "Kozlov's convoy departed there overnight. Position 20 minutes ago," Corporal Hayes reported. "Intelligence confirms 3 vehicles, 2 escort cars and 1 armored sedan in the middle. Estimated arrival at our observation point in 45 minutes. Sarah methodically checked every component of the Barrett M82A1, ensuring that the weapon was perfectly clean and properly zeroed. She loaded a single armor-piercing incendiary round into the chamber, knowing that she might not get a chance to fire a second shot. Sergeant Thompson provided updated weather data. Wind is currently 6 miles per hour from the southwest. Atmospheric pressure is stable. Temperature is 72 degrees and rising slowly. Conditions should remain consistent for the next hour." Sarah used the meteorological data to calculate her holdover and windage adjustments. At 3 miles, even minor environmental factors could cause significant deviation in the bullet's trajectory. She made careful notes on a small card that she could reference quickly during the shot. "Martinez, there's something else you need to know," the colonel said, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Latest intelligence indicates that Kozlov's vehicle is more heavily armored than we initially thought. You're going to need to hit a specific area, either the engine block or the driver's compartment, for the armor-piercing round to be effective." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The target area was now even smaller than she had planned for. At 3 miles, she would essentially be aiming at a section of the vehicle no larger than a dinner plate. While the entire convoy traveled at highway speeds, through the spotting scope, Sarah studied the road where the convoy would appear. The route wound through a narrow valley between 2 rocky ridges, providing only a brief window of opportunity as the vehicles crossed an open area approximately 600 yards long. "Time window?" Sarah asked. "Based on their current speed, you'll have approximately 30 seconds of clear visibility," Sergeant Thompson replied. "The convoy will be moving at an estimated 45 miles per hour through the open section. Sarah ran through the calculations one more time. A vehicle traveling at 45 mph would cover approximately 66 feet per second. With an 8-second flight time for the bullet, she would need to aim nearly 530 feet ahead of the target when she fired. The margin for error was impossibly small. "Contact," Corporal Hayes announced suddenly. Convoy spotted 5 miles out and approaching on schedule. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar weight of the massive rifle against her shoulder. Through the powerful scope, she could see a dust cloud on the distant road marking the convoy's approach. Her heart rate increased, but her breathing remained controlled and steady. 4 miles out, Hayes reported. Maintaining speed, Sarah began her final mental checklist. Wind conditions, atmospheric pressure, temperature, distance, target speed, lead calculation. Every variable had to be perfect for the shot to succeed. 3 miles out, the dust cloud was clearly visible now, and Sarah could make out individual vehicles through her scope. The convoy was maintaining tight formation with the armored sedan protected in the center, just as intelligence had predicted. 2 miles out, target will be in the open section in approximately 3 minutes. Sarah's breathing slowed to the deliberate rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. In, hold, natural respiratory pause, squeeze trigger, follow through. The sequence had become as automatic as walking. 1 mile out, 60 seconds to target window. Through her scope, Sarah could now see the details of the convoy vehicles. The armored sedan was a dark blue color with heavily tinted windows, exactly matching the intelligence photographs. She identified the engine compartment and began tracking the vehicle's movement. 30 seconds. The convoy entered the open section of road, and Sarah had a clear view of all 3 vehicles. The lead escort car was already in her scope's field of view, followed by the target sedan, then the trailing security vehicle. "Target in sight," Sarah announced, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "You're cleared to take the shot when ready," the colonel replied. Sarah tracked the sedan through her scope, calculating the precise moment when she needed to fire. The vehicle appeared impossibly small at 3 miles, requiring her to rely on instinct as much as mathematical precision. "Wind steady at 6 mph southwest," Sergeant Thompson called out. Sarah made a final adjustment to her aim point. Leading the target by what her calculations indicated was the correct distance. The sedan continued its steady progress through the open area, unaware that it was being tracked by one of the most powerful sniper rifles in the world. The moment felt suspended in time as Sarah squeezed the trigger with smooth, steady pressure. The Barrett's massive report echoed across the desert like thunder, and Sarah felt the powerful recoil slam against her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched the .50 caliber bullet begin its 8-second journey across 3 miles of desert air, carrying with it the hopes of stopping one of the world's most dangerous arms dealers. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Sarah watched through her scope. The .50 caliber bullet traced an invisible arc across the desert, fighting against gravity and wind resistance as it traveled toward its target. 8 seconds felt like 8 minutes as the convoy continued its steady progress through the valley. Sarah maintained her shooting position, following the sedan through her scope while silently counting the seconds. 5, 6, 7. The vehicle showed no signs of knowing it was being targeted, maintaining its position in the center of the convoy formation. Then, at exactly 8 seconds, Sarah saw the unmistakable flash of the armor-piercing incendiary round striking the sedan's engine compartment. Even at 3 miles, the explosion was visible as a bright orange burst that sent smoke billowing from under the vehicle's hood. "Target hit," Sergeant Thompson shouted from behind his spotting scope. "Direct hit on the engine block." The sedan immediately began to lose speed, smoke pouring from its damaged engine. The driver apparently tried to maintain control, but the vehicle gradually slowed and came to a stop in the middle of the open area. The escort vehicles also stopped, their occupants clearly confused about what had happened. "Confirmed kill on the target vehicle," Corporal Hayes reported. "Kozlov's sedan is disabled and stationary." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with relief. The impossible shot had connected exactly where she had aimed, disabling the armored vehicle and stopping the convoy. After months of training and 24 hours of intensive preparation, she had successfully completed what many experts would have considered an impossible mission. The colonel lowered his binoculars and turned to Sarah with an expression of amazement. "Martinez, in 30 years of military service, I have never seen a more remarkable piece of marksmanship. That shot will be talked about in sniper schools for decades to come." Through the spotting scopes, They could see figures emerging from the escort vehicles and surrounding the disabled sedan. Radio chatter indicated that local law enforcement and military units were already moving to secure the area and apprehend Kozlov and his associates. "How did you know you could make that shot?" Sergeant Thompson asked, his voice filled with professional curiosity. Sarah thought about the question as she began cleaning the Barrett. "I didn't know for certain," she admitted, "but my grandfather always taught me that shooting is about more than just technical skill. He said the best marksmen develop an intuitive understanding of how bullets behave in flight, almost like they can see the path the bullet will take." She paused, looking out across the desert where her bullet had traveled. "When I lined up that shot, everything just felt right. The calculations, the wind conditions, the timing, it all came together in a way that made the shot feel possible rather than impossible." The colonel nodded thoughtfully. "That's the difference between a good sniper and a legendary one. Technical skills can be taught, but that kind of intuitive understanding is something that can't be learned from a manual." As they packed up their equipment, Corporal Hayes received confirmation that Kozlov had been successfully apprehended. The arms dealer was found unconscious but alive in his disabled vehicle, along with several encrypted communication devices and documents that intelligence analysts were eager to examine. "This operation will likely prevent dozens of future terrorist attacks," the colonel explained to Sarah. "Kozlov was one of the most prolific weapons suppliers in the international black market. Taking him out of circulation will save countless innocent lives." Sarah felt the full weight of what she had accomplished. The 3-mile shot had been a test of her technical skills, but the successful mission represented something much more significant. She had used her abilities to make a real difference in the world, preventing future violence and protecting people she would never meet. As they drove back to the main base, the colonel turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "Martinez, I need to ask you something. When I told you to stay back yesterday, when I suggested this mission might be beyond your capabilities, what made you insist on taking the shot?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sir, I think everyone has moments when they have to decide whether to step up or step back. My grandfather taught me that true courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway." She paused, watching the desert landscape roll past the vehicle window. "When you showed me that photograph of Kozlov and explained what he had done, I knew I had to try. Not because I was certain I could make the shot, but because I was the only one available who might be able to do it." The colonel smiled, and Sarah realized it was the first completely genuine smile she had seen from him. "Martinez, that's exactly the kind of thinking that separates exceptional soldiers from ordinary ones. You understood that sometimes the mission is more important than personal comfort or certainty." Back at the base, word of Sarah's successful shot had already spread among the other recruits and instructors. She found herself surrounded by people wanting to hear details about the 3-mile shot, though the classified nature of the operation limited what she could share. That evening, as Sarah sat in the mess hall, she reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been a trainee trying to prove herself worthy of advanced sniper training. Today, she was a soldier who had successfully completed one of the most challenging long-range shots in military history. The colonel approached her table and sat down across from her. "Martinez, I have some news. Based on your performance during this operation, you're being recommended for immediate advancement to the elite sniper program. You'll be working with special operations units on missions that require your particular set of skills." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and anticipation. The journey that had started with her grandfather's stories about legendary marksmen had led her to become one herself. But more importantly, she had learned that true marksmanship wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about using exceptional skills to protect others and serve a purpose greater than herself. As she looked out at the desert where she had made her impossible shot, Sarah Martinez knew that this was just the beginning of her story as one of the military's most remarkable snipers.